Thank you for allowing me into your homes for this 37th edition of Season 2 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would first like to start by thanking everyone that took the opportunity to come out to Opal Divines last night for the metaphysical and philosophical discussion meeting that Jeff Contreras from Therefore I Am and we here host, that we co-host every third Wednesday of the month. And again, I'd like to thank everyone that came out to make this meeting a lively entity that it is, and the successful meeting that we've been able to build up over this past year or so that we've been co-hosting these meetings. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for your continued support of these meetings. Let's see. I'd like to also remind folks that we do have a website these days, and the website address is very similar to our email address, esrshow.com. And the website itself right now is a little sparse. Like, for instance, there aren't a lot of links and that sort of thing. But if you link through to the existing links, then there are a wealth of other links, for instance, that you can get into through the other sites. And I kind of depend on those folks for a lot of the links that I myself might have had as a main page link. Nexus Magazine would be a good example. But you're able to link through other sites. And so, again, I kept it kind of trimmed down in that respect. But like, encourage people to take a look at it, and you know, if you want to give some feedback or contact, please do. I'd really appreciate that. Let's see. Also, today is the Mayan day yellow spectral sun, and so with the qualities that it makes available, I would hopefully have a better opportunity to disperse some enlightening concepts today, and that is always my goal with this show. But today I would like to discuss the topic of the shadow of ideas. And I actually did borrow that title, the shadow of ideas, from an early philosopher, an early Italian philosopher, well, from the 1500s basically, Giordano Bruno, and that was one of his early writings. I came across that, the shadow of ideas, the title for that writing, and it really encapsulated what I was trying to convey today, so I borrowed that from that particular individual. Excuse me. And so I would like to begin as far as considering the shadow of ideas from the standpoint, or from the origin point of ideas, and considering that a shadow of ideas would be considering the non-physical, or the let's see, how do you say that? Maybe the more spiritual origins of our ideas and our thoughts and our creativity. And so that would be, again, implied by the term the shadow of ideas. And how does humanity tap into the shadow aspect of ideas, the well of, the pool or the well from where all this information is drawn? How is that process accomplished? And how, to begin, how did the first creative impression find its way into the minds of men? And how did that process play out? And how also does that continuous thread of creativity find its way through the expression of humanity and through our unfolding evolutionary process of humanity? How does that process take place? If we go back into antiquity, as far as the first self-conscious individuals that we would consider, whether you picture that individual or that group as a caveman group, or however in your mind you would picture the first, again, self-conscious thinking individuals that we would term human, how did those original early thinkers derive the thoughts and the ideas? Was it just sort of like a Darwinian situation where circumstances forced them to think a certain way and to act based on environment strictly? Or were they able to tap into this quality of mind and use that, you know, again, early on in mankind, the very embryonic seeds of thought and organizing thought and pattern making and things of that nature? How did that process carry through? Was it strictly just an instinctual situation in which, again, man was forced to feed off of his environment and react thus from that, whatever may play out, and just be victimized by circumstances? Or, as I'm hoping to bring some evidence today, or some consideration to today, was there some sort of a divine impulse, some sort of a pattern behind the pattern that man sought to lay out in the material world? So, considering it from that perspective, that there always has been, if you'll follow through the all recorded history as much as possible, the writings of men, as much as we possibly know that we can trace back, and that mostly the more materialistic thinkers, the more orthodox thinkers, and the more abstract and esoteric thinkers have this body of knowledge that they can generally agree upon as these are the collective writings of all times, and this was the first. Most would agree anyway. You can agree upon early language and things of that nature, and see the progression forward. So we all have that to draw back upon to study and analyze and see. Was this just a mere chance that thought finds its way into the minds of men, or is there more of a pattern, more of an impulse, and more of an originating factor for thought that's unseen and that is metaphysical or esoteric, and that would be generated through, again, a divine or a superior consciousness to our humanity, and that how it would be able to, or this consciousness, a higher consciousness, would be able to impress upon the minds of men certain concepts and ideals. And so with that in mind, man, I feel, always has had a spiritual inclination latent inside himself from, again, this earliest point of self-consciousness. I feel that just as a seed for a plant intrinsically has the characteristics and the qualities within it to bring forth a mighty oak or a sunflower or anything for that matter that is embryonic and that goes through a pattern. Humanity is no different. There's an embryonic form genetically encoded that just knows somehow, there's a lot of speculation on how that is derived originally, where that origin starts. But nonetheless, if we consider that, the qualities that we have inherent in us are latent in us. Some believe that upon birth we have a condition of non-belief, and there are no pre-existing conditions that would color or taint our new birth into this world, and that we have a fresh slate to a certain degree. But my argument would be that there is karma, and that there is a building up through past lives and past opportunities and missed opportunities, that we have debt accumulated and we have to pay off. And so that's going to condition, again, some of the qualities inherent in the seed that would be any one of us. Excuse me. But again, pre-existing conditions, again, of an esoteric or unseen nature, intelligently guided, keeping that firmly in mind, that would find their way through this seed pattern into fuller fruition as it would grow and evolve and play out into some evolving life. And so, excuse me. So what was the catalyst or the originating factor that led to this creative impulse? Really, as far as I'm concerned, man, and again, using this body of knowledge that we have available, that we can trace back and study man's thinking, man's writings, and the evolution of of humanity through what he's learned and his growth. If we look back at this and see, man has always, and I think evidence shows, has always tried to mirror in his creation what is apparent and evident in the pattern of things in the heavens. And so the great injunction, as above, so below, is very relevant and ties in completely to the opportunity and, again, this catalyst or this impulse that humanity has borrowed from the earliest days when we first began to think and realize that we were a self-conscious entity, that we tried to mirror in our environment, again, patterns of things in the heavens. And again, certainly we would have to consider the early astronomers and then later the astrologers, and how they try to look into the heavens and see patterns of stars and see their circulation and rotation at that time, and how there was order and how there were cycles, and these things had to be built into our humanity, into our conscious thinking over some time as the rational, concrete mind came into existence more so and more so. But again, keeping in mind that the latent seeds for all of the great creations, I feel, again, came from a divine origin, and that individuals, when they sought to find a way to make the first shelter, when they said maybe we're going to get out of this cave, this naturally existing shelter, and we're going to build a self-standing or an existing structure apart from, a cave entrance or something of that nature. And how did that first concept mind? How do they know which plants were good and bad? Most would say, well, trial and error. If they saw their friend eat something and they kicked over and died, then it probably wasn't good for them. That is possible, but again, I'm trying to indicate that there was a divine influence and that individuals had guidance, and there never was a time where there was not divine guidance of some sort or another that allowed humanity to not be led along ignorantly, but just as young children have to go to elementary and on up through there and be educated, well, they don't have to be, but they can be educated through this hierarchical system, so too can humanity find its way through these same kind of paces. But if we look back, just back to the time of the first so-called Aryan race, which was the great Indian race, the continent of, or the country of India rather, as opposed to the American Indians, and how, again, this creative impulse found its way through these various cultures, and through the Indian, through the Persian, through the Egyptian, Chaldean, Hebrew, continually finding its way and refining itself through different creations, through different innovations, through renewal of what was old and making it more proper and more fit and more adequate for the current day. And we see this recycling of ideas that are hashed out over and over again through our humanity. Again, showing a pattern of humanity's thinking that some might say is just instinctual and ingrained in us to a certain degree, but I would say is part of us recognizing inherently the divine order of things, and again, trying to imitate or mirror that order within our existing structures. In all of our creative endeavor, especially in this day and age where we're very highly specialized, you can see to what degree individuals try to, and really are bound to, order and structure as far as any endeavor they may have, whether that's, getting a job, some creative endeavor, building something, legislation, things of that nature, music, all these things that are created. A lot of thought process and a lot of details can go into these. But again, my humble estimation of this whole matter is that the more accurately one can see the pattern of things in the heavens, so-called, they can draw that into their creation, and they can make a creation of rare beauty by being able to tap in and get the most accurate representation. So the mirror image they're hoping to create on the physical plane will be as close and as accurate and as faithful to the divine impulse that they tapped into to draw this current so that they could create. And that is the destiny, in my estimation, and certainly there's evidence that can back this up as well, that humanity is destined to co-create with the divine, and every creative effort that we make is going to be an offering up to, at some level, even if one is offering up to the most negative and darkest aspects of our manifestation, that still is nonetheless an aspect of divinity, if you really want to look at it in those absolute terms. And so any offering, as far on the spectrum as it may be from what one might consider naturally divinity, it still is based on some divine impulse along the lines that's going to feed into the mind of a man or an individual somewhere and get that spark fired so that they will create some way or another. And so again, the more we can respectfully replicate whatever it is, that the divine impulse that we somehow intuit or sense or feel compelled to follow, however closely, the closer we can bring that pattern down to earth in our creations, the truer it will be to a divine expression. And so I certainly believe that the purer the vessel, the more accurately and the more potent these mirror images will be. They'll be more faithful reflections because we'll be more capable of having a clearer channel and a clearer focus and clearer perception in order to bring, again, a more faithful recreation of some sort of an impulse or something that we sense of a divine nature that we feel compelled to bring in as some physical plane creation. And so if we just consider from, again, this unfolding of cultural ages, from, again, the Egyptian, Chaldean, Hebrew Great Age to the next age, which is the Greco-Roman, there we really see thought defined itself more so, and then the spectrum of thinking was more diversified, and people at that point in time slowly began to question many things that were just a given previously. Certainly, if we go back again to the earlier humans, whether again you think of them as a caveman or whatever, those people were divinely inspired. You might say they were superstitious, and they were ignorant of the larger reality that we have available today, and I would have to agree with that to a certain degree also. But nonetheless, they still, whether it's you call it superstition or what have you, they acted according to what they felt might have been some divine or some external force that was conditioning their lives that they had no control over. And so certainly you can point to early groups of humanity allegedly worshiping, well, certainly they did worship many inanimate objects. I don't want to include the sun because any great society or any culture that has ever worshipped the sun has ever been the symbol of the one God, the one indivisible God for all cultures throughout antiquity. And so that esoterically would not change. But there certainly are those that worshipped, animals and rocks and all things of various natures. So man has always felt compelled to move and shake according to some outside supernatural, if you want to call it that, force. And that's always motivated him one way or another throughout time. But again, getting into the Greco-Roman days, we started to really refine our process of thinking, and that's when mathematics came into being more so and were more revered. And certainly as far as considering a sense of relationship, proportion, shape, size, symmetry, all of these things that tie into, again, relation, distance, things of that nature, became more substantial and were more important later on as we evolved more so. And again, mathematics and science demonstrated and reflected this reviving sense of proportion and symmetry. Again, always being a divine impulse that we intuit throughout time of some divine energy, or however you want to term it, and that has been tapped into and has fed the stream of consciousness and allowed some individual to tap into it. And so if we follow the chain, again, through the earliest humanity, of any individual that has brought forward some great idea, whether that be a great scientific idea, a great religious movement, again, scientific, medical, something in healing, some social reform, some kind of governmental, some legislation, things of that nature. When we see throughout time the significant spikes, kind of like an earthquake spike or something of that nature, where we can see a distinct head and shoulders above the rest of the average situation, where like a Galileo came along, Copernicus, people of that nature would come in and completely change the paradigm. And why is it that these certain few individuals throughout time were the groundbreaking individuals? What was it that set them apart from the rest of humanity and did make them seem to be larger than life and bigger in many respects than your average man, as far as their thinking capacity and their creative ability and their ability to, as I said earlier, express faithfully the divine and create according to their interpretation, their intuition of the pattern of things in the heavens, and to bring that down faithfully and accurately. And so we find, again, the list is too long to really go into details. I mean, I'd have to do a whole season or two if I started naming names like a Leonardo da Vinci, a Giordano Bruno, all of the great thinkers throughout time, and especially up until the 19th century, for absolute sure, we can see them having a very deep sense of divinity and trying to, again, faithfully reflect in their actions and their creativity and their thinking a divine impulse. And so we can, again, trace that, and we can see all of the great things that have taken place through time. And we can see that all of these great movers and shakers throughout time were involved in one way or another with, again, trying to tap into the divine and bring that down into expression. Not always was this to bring it down for the betterment of humanity. In some instances, again, tapping into the divine Some negative aspects have tapped into the divine as well. If you want to look at like a Hitler, for instance, that was a necessary moving and shaking to change the world scenario, to shake up the existing order, if you will, so that things would be able to change and there would be some shifting and moving around. And even a Hitler, some might say, well, he was an atheist or something like that. That's definitely not the case, because if you're familiar with the Vril Society and the Thule Society, the secret societies that were originated around that time, that he was a big part in, and that he was very aware of and very much active in, that he sensed that there was a supernatural existence outside of our humanity, and that he was trying to make contact with this presence, this energy, for his own benefit. And so again, looking back through time, when you find similar incidents like that, where you might say this person was not divinely inspired, they killed a lot of people or whatever, that impulse still at some level came into their consciousness and compelled them to make a great change. When I say great, I mean vast and large, not necessarily great as far as good and beneficial. But nonetheless, these things happen according to divine law. They happen according to a divine pattern, and different individuals, according to their capacity, are going to tap into that energy and make use of it one way or another for the benefit of humanity, or in some cases, the detriment of humanity. But the larger movings behind the scenes are going to be indicative of this creative expression finding its way into manifestation through our human evolution. We as humanity are the midpoint, or the gatekeeper, between the lower kingdoms in humanity and the higher kingdoms. And so we are a reflection, again, a mirror reflection of what is below and what is above. We in our human system reflect the godly and the non-godly. We have God immanent and God transcendent inherent in our body, in our being. And that's something to keep in mind. God is within and without at the same time simultaneously. And that is how we've always been able to tap into that divine flow, the Akashic record, Raincloud of unknowable things, many terms that describe this stream of consciousness that we've been able to, again, various individuals have been able to tap into throughout time to bring forth some creative expression. And if we consider many of the aspects, for instance, exploration and trade, if we consider early exploration, how that changed the world, changed our view of our surrounding area, the impulse, again, to explore and move out and branch out is going to be sparked by some divine influence, some compelling situation, some compelling catalyst or some impulse that's going to cause these people to want to move out, explore, and look around. And then trading, again, certainly we have to exchange with other groups in order to trade. And so this aspects of navigation and commerce were certainly early things that led to this unfolding and this evolution of humanity. But again, I have to really make the firm assertion that there was a divine impulse that, again, would have moved these great explorers and those that sought to trade initially. Also, too, I want to bring up the fact that always throughout time there have been groups of individuals that have been set apart for their ability, their capacity, and their potential, that they could be more in tune with the divine. And so early in our humanity, when the divine really literally walked among the sons of men, and we kept company with angelic and higher forms of expression and evolution that sought to guide our early races as our senses hadn't even fully developed at that time. Eyesight, hearing, things of that nature hadn't even fully developed at that point. So we had to have some guidance. And we were physically, if you want to look at it in that sense, more of a spiritual nature. Our being, our composition was more of a spiritual refinement than dense matter. And so we had, as a result of that relationship, guidance, and we were able to work hand in hand with these creative spiritual hierarchies, angelic and otherwise, that sought to guide and watch over the race from the earliest inception of the thinking man, the self-conscious, well, before that as well, but as far as our understanding and cognizant awareness of that interaction, that intercession, and that agreement, that exchange, that we've always had that guidance from the earliest times, and it's carried and progressed its way forward, and it has evolved and progressed with our human evolution as we've come from this point of spirit down into denser matter, and now that we're back on the ascending arc. Many individuals are aware of our opportunity to, again, make contact with these inner plane creative aspects, and they're at various levels. Some may make reference to gnomes and sprites and fairies and things of that nature. Those really are just terms to reflect the lesser creative lives that are moved and motivated by the thoughts of men and the thoughts, again, of these extra human, like the angelic, for instance, their hierarchies, and these hosts of individuals and entities that, again, watch over and guide the race. And that mankind is coming into a renewal of this spiritual capacity to be able to create much more in line with the divine, and to, again, continue to refine our evolution through this process. And again, if we consider in earlier days the printing press and how that changed things, and how that made for a freer flow of thoughts and ideas. And again, finding back in the in the Renaissance days, from roughly about 1300 to 1650, we find a resurgence, a renewal of the impulse that's touched the Greek and Roman societies and cultures. And this, again, this sense of relationship, proportion, shape, size, symmetry, and the aesthetic appreciation, the appreciation of the good, the true, and the beautiful became more and more refined, and discriminating taste developed in humanity. The idea of discrimination and taste and choice was foreign to the earliest humans. We had to refine and develop these discriminating capacities within ourselves. And so by that being the case, the things of the nature of art, literature, architecture, music, they took on these aesthetics, they took on these refined qualities, and increasingly so, some may not argue with that in some instances. Some may say classical music is far superior than modern music. But if you really look at the evolution of music, if you took, for instance, Mozart and compared it to a fusion jazz band like Weather Report, you'd have to take in consideration the evolution of man's thinking and mental capacity to be able to create in a varied manner, in a much more diverse and abstract manner than was previously available to humanity. So we can see this tracing of evolution through all the creative endeavors. Again, whether that's in architecture, literature, music, politics, certainly. We can see the evolution of politics. The Magna Carta would be one great thing that would stick out. And our American Revolution would certainly tie in as well as great movements that reflect this freeing up of divinity, this attempt to make a law that reflects the patterns of things in the heaven, and to make as true and as faithful a copy of what we sense and intuit in the divine realms. And so to make a law like the Constitution, or for instance like the Magna Carta that preceded our Constitution, that again, the divine influence sparked this great movement, and these groundbreaking and these world-changing documents had very much a cyclic and periodical flow, a cyclic flow that's recurring from time to time, but always refining itself. We see things originally showing up in our evolution, and then we see the refining over time of these processes, whether that be, again, political or within the arts community, things of this nature that we see changing. And certainly if we consider from the earliest times all the way through the Dark Ages and through the Renaissance, we can see and trace the evolution of philosophy, the science of magic, and alchemy, and how these things tied in to certain individuals' ability to capture, again, this divine impression and bring it down into some expression. Again, these medieval alchemists, philosophers, magicians, so-called, they were always very prominent in the courts of the wealthy, the aristocracy, all of the royal individuals of antiquity, and very much so in Europe and Asia, India, certainly no different. You find in these courts always there would be individuals, the term magi certainly ties in as well, that there were always these individuals that gave counsel and advice and guidance, and perhaps in some cases did more than that through their ability to understand philosophy, magic, and alchemy, and how to change and manipulate matter. And so that being the case, they always were able to endear themselves to royalty, and they were always able to influence the minds of those in power and those that were influential and affluential. And that, again, is always been the case and can be tied back to this tradition of philosophy, magic, so-called, and we can see from its earliest origin how it too has progressed and found its way into all of the progressive movements throughout all time, excuse me, and how these certain key individuals have always been, if you will, in the right place at the right time, although I certainly don't believe that there is coincidence. I think that these things do, again, happen according to divine law, and that happen every so often as needed for a very good reason. And there's an intelligence, and there's certainly a motive behind all of that. And so, again, we can find how these individuals moved and were the movers and shakers behind the scenes always. And that, again, refers back to the term esoteric, inner, within, hidden, arcane, all these terms that apply to an inner quality, an inner divine latent nature that we have, that we can tap into. Some throughout humanity were able to, again, stand head and shoulders above the rest of humanity and demonstrate the full capacity. They were able to measure up to the fullness of the stature of the nature of Christ as it's spoken of in the Gospels. That capacity latent within all of us, because we have in our seed nature the capacity for genius. Genius is really, in actuality, the norm among our humanity. It's our karma and certain things that have moved us away from that knowing and that all-knowing, that omniscient, as far as our material being can. That's a little misleading, because there's a point where God is unknowable. At a certain point where God is no one thing, so that can be misleading. But there is what is knowable within the divine law, and that is what all these great individuals have tapped into throughout antiquity and brought forth that expression. So they seem to have towered above the average intellect, the average capacity, the average, in spite of adverse situations. And so we look back at these key individuals throughout time, whether that be Leonardo da Vinci, again, Galileo. It would take too long, and there are just too many to really get into depth with. But to throw a few examples kind of helps illustrate the point. All of these individuals were tied into some form of tapping into the divine and trying to express the highest ideals, their highest aspirations. And so considering that, also, again, considering that we've always had our guidance behind the scenes, that there have been groups that have been devised and that have arisen around those in humanity that were a few steps a little higher on the rung of evolution, on the ladder. We all have the same equal opportunities, again, latent inside of us. Some take more advantage and are able to make further, faster progress on this path of evolution, or equipped, again, according to a divine impulse, found their way into so-called secret societies. And the secret society tradition for the bulk of humanity's existence was, for a long time, was good and pure. Later on in our evolutionary process, things changed into which more of the negative matter, material aspect, became predominant and dominated and was appeared seemingly to be, everything everywhere, and that disappeared from the face of the earth. That is part and parcel of our evolutionary process. We have to get into this process of forgetting and get into this dense material nature so that we can have something to work against, something to refine against, so that he can build his muscles, build the circulatory system, build the respiratory system. All these things are invigorated through him moving through another medium, which is the water. He's working against the water, and just in the same sense, we are working through our material nature, just like a swimmer through water. So we have to wade through and find our way through this miasma, this mist and this fog and this matrix that we're immersed in and enmeshed in. So how do we do that? we follow the examples throughout time, and they can be strung together like pearls on a refined and beautiful necklace, that the best pearls, the finest, most highest quality pearls, if you want to look at it in that sense, were always, again, these individuals that stood above the average humanity and did some great thing, and they are respected and revered and remembered for what they have done and what they've brought forth. We can see that thread of transmission, and it follows along the line of the secret society, if you want to use that term, or the mystery tradition, or the inner or the esoteric teachings of all ages, and that this elevated humanity has always been affiliated with these groups of inner teachers, and that they have helped, not by imposing their will, but by a hint, an innuendo, what have you, just guiding and watching over our humanity to help us out a bit as much as we wanted help. If we ask for intervention, then we will receive intervention. It's up to us as to how much we want to do things on our own and how much we want to take in some help from an outside source. Help's always available, and standing ready and watching and waiting for us, but it's conditional. We have to say, hey, we want help. Otherwise, those that would otherwise love to help us out, they kind of have their hands tied. They're not able to just break the rules, if you will. Conversely, though, those that work in the involutionary or the coming into the denser material cycle, they do tend to break the rules, as are sometimes termed, more so, and they ultimately suffer the consequences for that, and that is what is termed black magic by a lot of individuals. That term apparently is not the most savory term with all the viewers out there, but nonetheless it's the most accurate and historical term that reflects that science and the negative aspect of it, if you will. Just like there's the yin and the yang, there's the positive and the negative, there also is to any energy, any working out, any mental process, there's a negative and a positive aspect to it to bring it into creation. And we can accentuate the negative or we can accentuate the positive. It's really entirely up to us as to how we choose to proceed. And so again, keeping in mind that this thread of great humanity is available for us to look back at and see, and then once we get into the further writings or if you can get the writings of the individuals themselves, it's always best. That way you can see what their process was, their thinking process or motivational process, what led them to be these great individuals. How was it that they found their way into these situations that allowed them the opportunity to express this capacity that we all have inherent inside of us. We can look back at all of these great individuals throughout time and see that whether it's an Alexander the Great or even a Napoleon, people like that were the great conquerors, and some might say, again, where's the divine impulse there? They injured a lot and they killed a lot of people. But again, when there's a need for a new impulse, a change of scenery, if you will, this divine impulse sets in to disrupt the current situation and the current static state, to disrupt and create upheaval so that something new can come into being. And certainly, again, we're bombarded all the time with New World Order thinking and things of that nature and propaganda. And most of thinking individuals know that there is a New World Order, but as to whether or not it's going to be a totalitarian, slanted, for the few, those who wish to enslave us, New World Order, or one in which we can all partake of the abundant resources of the planet, have free exchange, have free expression, mobility, liberty, and be the creators that we should be. We, again, have as our divine birthright the duty, if you will, to co-create with the divine. And so to live up to that duty, that obligation, dharma is another term you can consider, to fall back on that and to fully express it to its most optimum. That's really up to us individually as to how much we want to reflect in our life expression what is available through the divine. And so considering that again, that this, again, the great movers and shakers of humanity, we can, again, tie them together and see their progression like pearls on a necklace and see them how they, to a certain degree, how they got to where they are, and what were the conditioning factors and what were the motivational factors in their personal endeavors. And you can see a pattern again, a pattern based on them trying to mirror the pattern of things in the heavens. And that pattern would be a life of purity, a life of trying to express in some way the divine and tapping into that impulse. Again, in some individuals, it's more of an automatic response as opposed to some, active longing or seeking for some God or something of that nature. Some people are just able to intuitively tap into the creative expression and bring forth some new idea or something that's going to change and in some way or another ultimately be beneficial. Again, certain things, when they come into manifestation, a lot of things are either ridiculed or some people may be frightened of things that come in that are new and may seem a bit different and foreign to someone. And it takes time to assimilate and understand and make these things that were at first extreme the everyday norm. If you were to bring one of these early individuals in the modern day and show him a camera, show him a television, and these analogies have been used up and beaten up quite a bit, but nonetheless they still hold true. Show an early individual something that they can't explain, and they may fall back on some supernatural belief system or some fear. Again, if they're coming from a place of feeling that you're all-knowing and you're very well informed, or that you're quite informed about current things and things of that nature, then you might choose to ridicule some new expression. It's really, it varies with individuals. But we see ultimately ideas and things coming into the mainstream and finding their way as some accepted part of our evolution over time. And that's been that way, again, through all the great scientific discoveries, medical discoveries, social endeavors, legislation, all things of that nature, great religious movements. All these things have found their way through this chain of transmission and have been expressed through some great individual and then filtered down through a chain of command, if you will, into the average man in the street, and he was able at his level to interpret and understand this great ideal that found its way down and filtered down and ultimately made its way into some form that just anybody could perceive and take advantage of and understand at some level. And that becomes then everyday common understanding and it becomes commonplace in our evolution. But again, it comes from a point of a radical point of origin in many instances to finding its way to some point of acceptance and diluting itself down enough to where many individuals can understand and take advantage of some impulse. Considering that, let me go ahead and grab a few calls and see what's going on. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. When you speak of secret societies such as the Freemasons, would you include fag bastards unite?
Well, your message is public. I don't know what your motivation is, young man, but who knows? I don't know. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, if you were a hot dog and was starving, would you eat yourself?
I can't hear you very well. Chris, could you turn him up, please?
If you were a hot dog and was starving, would you eat yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm really having difficulty hearing you. I'm going to let you go. I apologize. I just can't really hear what you're saying. Let me go ahead and finish up a bit here and continue on with what I was speaking about. Again, I'm really trying to hammer home the point that all the great movers and shakers throughout antiquity, throughout our human evolution, have tapped into this divine impulse at some level and been able to bring forth this expression into our existence at some level. Early on, there was no such thing as disbelief or non-belief. That is a much later symptom of our descent into physical matter. And I use the word descent in the esoteric sense of the word, not as a derogatory or negative means. The idea of non-belief is a much later condition in our human thinking. And that also factors into the concept and what I try to substantiate in that all of those individuals that made some significant contribution were divinely inspired, and that those that come from some non-belief can be creative, but are many times the least likely to bring forth some creative expression. because they're not able to tap into, again, the wealth and abundance of the divine force or energy that is available to humanity, that is part of our birthright and is part of our very being, because, again, we are God immanent and God transcendent. We have God within and God without that we are connected to. And if we can't make that connection, if we don't have that clear channel to make that connection, then we're going to have difficulty bringing in some ideal or what have you. And so, again, if you really look back into history into the, who were the early atheists, it's a little vague and a little shadowy. You can't really, some that are allegedly from the Greco-Roman days, if you read their writings, they really weren't anywhere near atheist. And the Buddhists were considered atheists because they believed that God and that all manifestation came from nothing or from no thing, which is what the esoteric concept believes as well, that there is a point of non-existence that finds its way into our creative manifestation, that there is intelligence, but non-latent, non-active, and non-identifiable energy, if you will, whatever term you want to use, that is God, and that is the well from which all manifestation originates. But to be able to tap into that aspect is part and parcel of the creative process, and that's why I feel that those that have been the more significant contributors throughout time have been those that have been able to keep that channel pure and have been able to tap into these divine patterns and reflect them very faithfully, or as faithfully as they could, in their own way, in their own activities, whatever they were doing. Again, scientists, statesmen, some kind of social mover and shaker. All those things had their origin, their spark. And again, I'm trying to make the assertion, the allegation that, and substantiate that there's a divine impulse that led to these great creations that we have available to us. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Just to add into your ideas.
That's a new one.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. You?
Good.
Hey, if you were a hot dog, would you eat? I believe that's what the last caller asked.
I'm sorry, if I were what again?
If you were a hot dog, would you eat yourself?
That's a bit, I have to think on that a bit.
Yeah, that's a heavy one, isn't it?
Say again?
It's a heavy one.
Yeah, that's one of those head twisters. I really, I have to give some thought to that. I'm not too sure. What's your opinion on the matter?
I don't know. To me, it's like the sound of one hand clapping.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good example. Do you have anything else you care to add?
Nah.
Okay, well, I appreciate you clarifying that for me because I really couldn't hear the other caller, but thanks for adding that. That's one hand clapping. That's pretty, I would say that's pretty similar. Okay, caller, you on the air?
The answer to that riddle is
hello, caller, you on the air?
Hello?
Hi, how are you?
I have one question I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
All right.
Is there some football game on or something this evening? Again, I just want to continue to bring this point up. Everyone's going to look at this differently as to where do these people get their ideas? How did the first person think of the first shelter? How did they first think of fire? How do these things come into human expression one way or another? Some are going to say, again, it's just circumstances of nature and random events and extraneous and outside circumstances that led them to spark them to change one way or another, and to have some action to help themselves out. Again, making a shelter or having fire or whatever. But again, my concession is that or allegation is that there was a divine impulse behind all of that moving and shaking, and that it can be traceable if we really take the time. And again, I think also, too, we have to have our own channel to divine intuition open adequately and sufficiently to appreciate these pearls of great wisdom that have been represented through these great individuals throughout time. If we can't tap into that in our own understanding and make some use of that, and again, tap into that divine impulse in our own lives, then we're going to have trouble connecting the dots in that sense to see the fullness of how things really are playing themselves out. And we're going to start compartmentalizing and seeing things in a fractured, partial manner. And not to say that I have the full picture by any stretch, but I do firmly contend and will continue to always contend and try to hopefully demonstrate through life expression that esoteric science will allow you, with the keys, to unfold that latent genius and capacity that we all have within ourselves. It just really depends on how much effort and energy one wants to put into that endeavor to change oneself. The true alchemy of changing a lower, dense nature, material person into a spiritual, aspiring towards right human relations and goodwill, and trying to be a beneficial worker for the bulk of humanity to help each other out as much as possible. You know, we can make that choice, and if we choose to transform ourselves and transmute ourselves, we can be living expressions of that divine impulse, just as these other great individuals were. In this day and age, you don't really see quite as much the head and shoulders above average humanity mover and shaker, because our evolution has kind of leveled the playing field to a certain degree, where we all, again, are more capable of taking in that divine impulse and really making something out of it. And we have that more readily available through our evolutionary process these days. I'm going to go ahead and grab another call. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Hey, Corey, it's Chris.
Hey, what's going on, man? How are you?
Flag Bashers Unite!
Hey, man! Good one, man. I've been busted for, that's a good one. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Hello.
Hello? Oops. Hello, caller.
Hello?
Hey, go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah, go
All
ahead.
right, I'm pretty new to watching the show. I was just wondering what your key belief is. I'm pretty new seeing you on here. If you could just fill me in really quick.
Key belief, I really believe that all teachings, like as far as like, you know, religious teaching, philosophical teaching, and all scientific endeavor for that matter, all those three components are all tied in to what I call esoteric science, and you can trace back, again, like I was saying, through these pearls, or however you want to look at it, all the great individuals throughout time.
What about the Indians, the Native Americans?
Yeah, they had their heyday. They did their thing. I have much respect for the Native Americans. When I was a little kid, and if I could have been a historical individual, I would like to have been a Native American. I probably was a Native American at some time, just like many of us were, if you believe in reincarnation. So I really have a nostalgic sense for that period in our history, very much so. And a much appreciation for what those people did, and also for the fact that they're still willing to share with their white brethren and the people that overtook their land a lot of the key components to their sacred beliefs. They're willing to share and exchange in this day and age because they realize we all have to come together and make the best of the situation. And so they're not holding a grudge, and I really appreciate that. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Hey, man, what's up? Don't cut me off. Let's talk. I got you on that last one, didn't I?
Man, that was good, buddy.
I kind of sounded like
Your
Chris
imitations
Athanas.
sometimes are a little, but that one was very good. Were you practicing on that one for a while or what?
I rehearsed it a couple times
All right,
just to
very
make sure
good.
I had it down. But, man, I enjoy your show.
Cool.
I'm here usually for the duration.
I
every
appreciate
night.
that. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, you notice how Jeff, he got me on Tuesday.
You know,
I didn't quite get it out there.
I'm sorry?
I didn't quite get it out there. He kind of
I was going to
recognized the
say,
voice.
I mentioned to my producer, I was like, man, what's the guy getting, changing his philosophy? I didn't hear anything from you.
Well, because he cut me off before I
I heard you say Meat Eaters Unite or something.
Whoa, no, that must have been some other imposter.
Oh, that wasn't you? Oh,
That was
okay.
another imposter.
An imposter. See, man, what you're doing, man? You're causing these these phonies to crop up.
Well, yeah, but they eventually could be new recruits.
Possibly, man. This
we-
thing could gain some legs.
We've got
man.
a
I
few.
don't know.
We've got a few copycats out there who are welcome to join whenever they want. So
Fair enough.
we'll have to mold them, shape them, and mold them, and train them into and then teach them the ways of the bashing philosophy.
Fair enough.
So,
Sounds good.
anyways, man,
Well, hey, I hope
enjoy.
that Chris was watching. I hope he got, or Jeff or somebody was watching, so they got as much of a kick out of that as I did. But I appreciate you.
Yeah, I kind of had it down there a little bit. Kind of convinced myself.
Got to convince yourself first, man.
Right. Make sure you got the voice down. So, anyways, I just wanted to give you a shout out, man.
Anything else you care to add before I let you go?
Yeah, sure.
Flag Bashers Unite! Flag Bashers Unite! Flag Bashers Unite! Flag Bashers Unite!
Wonderful. I appreciate that. Wonderful. Yeah, again, you definitely got me, man. I'm feeling really, red-faced, to tell you the truth, man. But that was good. I'm laughing. That was good. Hello, caller, are you on the air?
Hello.
How's it going?
All right. How you doing?
Good.
Hey, do you know anything about Jesus Christ?
I try to think that outlook on that is that I try to make myself an imitator or a follower of the pattern that Jesus, through Christ, offered us in the gospel narratives and other sources as well. But I do try to make that my life goal, to attain and to do all those things that he said and greater things. That is certainly my goal.
But do you know that none of us are perfect? You know, I'm no better than anybody else.
But I would say that we have the seed latent inside of ourselves for perfection.
Only if you're a born-again Christian, you have to be born again to go to heaven.
What does that mean, born again, specifically to you?
Well, according to the Bible, the Scriptures, which is a true Word of God, is when you confess your sins to the Father or to Jesus, you admit you're a sinner and you ask Him for forgiveness.
Okay.
And only God knows.
I don't have much time, but I would say that we have to be baptized or born of fire and the Holy Spirit. And if you understand the esoteric symbolism behind the words of the great religious books, in particular the Bible, and the impulse that has behind it, that there are other aspects to it that are a bit more complex than just a simple offering up of belief or a simple expression of faith, or just to say that I believe Jesus died on a cross to save my sorry carcass, I think is a little misleading. So I would caution you to think of the inner nature of the words written, and that there are parables for those outer, and the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven are taught to those that are in the inner understanding of this divine expression. And that's not to exclude anyone. We all have the capacity to understand it. It's just whether or not we choose to put ourselves in the position to make the most benefit of that latent capacity for perfection that we all have available. Again, Jesus the pattern, Christ the power, but I would agree with you at that level. Hello, caller. How are you? Hello?
Hello? Oh, hey,
Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to tell you that, sorry, should we turn down the TV?
Continue to talk, it's fine. Go ahead.
Right. It was nice to hear you say that it's possible that the New World Order could potentially be positive. And we are enjoying your show, and maybe you could expound on that more.
Certainly will. You're going to be the last caller, so I'll let you go on that note. But yes, there is a New World Order, and there always has been a striving towards order in our creative expression. As to whether it's going to be a beneficial order for all of us or if it's going to be a negative one, it depends on each individual's thinking and how they choose to add their positive or negative energy. If you accept the paradigm that we're all cooked and there's no hope, then that's certainly what we will be. But if you can look at it optimistically, to connect the dots on the larger scene, on the larger picture, and look at our youth, look at the children as a hope for the future. That's what I have to really encourage people to do. And if folks would consider checking out every Tuesday at 10 on Channel 10, Therefore I Am with Jeff Contreras. I'd like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to thank all of you out there, Austin. Have a nice evening. Thanks.